It's perhaps the greatest debate in League of Legends. Once new accounts hit level 7, players are faced with a choice that will follow them the rest of their League career. Where should you put Flash? On F or D? It's a huge decision, whether they know it or not at the time. You see, Flash isn't just a spell. It's a life saved, it's a kill secured, it's a one team fight, it's a huge outplay, and it's so much more. Your choice could even determine your future rank. Flash is definitely the most important summoner in the game. It's used about 95% of the time, which means on average, only one player in every 2 games forgoes taking Flash for a different spell. But does it even really matter what key you use? Does this great debate even have any meaningful, objective answer? Let's find out. F or D is a question that transcends time. In 2014, just a few years into League's explosion, one Redditor posted a simple survey asking the community if they put their Flash on F or D, and it received 77,000 responses in a single day. Flash on F barely won out at just 51%. That wasn't the beginning of the conversation, and it sure wasn't the end of it either. 3 years later, a frustrated Redditor claimed the debate had gone on too long and was hoping to find a final answer. But of course, we're still here searching for an answer today. Throughout internet conversations, some claim D is the most logical since it's the default for Ghost on new accounts, and players tend to replace Ghost with Flash. Others say they used Heal on D in the tutorial and kept Heal on D in their games, which only made it natural to put Flash on F. Some say it relates to using 4 fingers on QWER, or just 3 on QWE, but as the Redditor above concluded, it's not quite that simple either. And Reddit isn't the only place people have gone for answers. Media have long asked pros about their preferences or reasons why, trying to find some ultimate answer, but all the pros ever have is personal preference.
So everyone knows you have Smite on F because D is for Dash. Wait, no, sorry, I got that backwards. Everyone knows you put Smite on D because F is for Flash.
But there's gotta be some way we can tell what key is best, right? Right? A good few years ago, Riot dove in deep to see if they could solve League's biggest mystery themselves, analyzing data from across the world. Overall, Flash was taken on F 51% of the time, a whole handful more than Flash on D at only 45%. 4% were left playing Flashless. Stinking Shaco mains. But each region had its own preferences, and some of those preferences were very strong. EU West had about 54% Flash on D. EU North was even further skewed, and less than 40% took Flash on F. In Russia, nearly 10% of people didn't load onto the Rift with Flash at all. In Turkey, over 60% of players threw Flash on D, the least of all the regions Riot studied. Their most skewed data, however, was in Korea, where 73% of players loaded onto the Rift with Flash on F. Now, given that they're historically the best region in the world, especially when considering solo queue prestige, Flash on F could be considered a bit superior from this specific angle. On the flip side, however, almost every region Riot studied favored Flash on D, so if that's where you put it, don't worry. Most of the world is actually on your side, but Korea's huge preference was enough to balance the total to F. Riot also concluded that there was no significant difference in win rate for either F or D, and that across every region they studied, the largest win rate difference was a measly 0.2%. Fast forward 5 years and we have 2022 data from Diamond 1 and up across all the same regions plus Japan. F is no longer in the lead. In fact, the percentages almost flipped. Flash on D sits just over 50%, while Flash on F is down roughly 43%, and no Flash has risen to nearly 7%. Only 2 regions favored F, Korea and Japan. Most regions sat around a 53 to 57% rate in favor of D. Turkey was still the most skewed, with over 63% locking in Dash, and unsurprisingly, Korea was skewed exactly the opposite way, with about 64% taking F. Part of the flip may be a result of the more limited data based on rank, where Riot was analyzing ranked games and normal games for all level 30 plus accounts, whereas our 2022 data is specifically solo queue for high elo. Regardless, the swap is interesting, though it may lead to just as many more questions as answers. Win rates on D and F were fairly similar and rather inconclusive, but what if a Flash's optimal key could be better determined by the lane and a role a player opts into? When diving into each specific role, the stats change up. So who prefers F and who prefers D? And are there any correlations with win rate? Well, it turns out this answer is fairly easy. When combining high elo data from all across the globe, every single role has a slight preference for D. Doesn't matter if you play jungle or support, carries or tanks or bruisers or whatnot, everything seems pretty standardized across the board. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense. Logically speaking, most players choose where they bind Flash when they're newly minted level 7, and at that point in time, they're not really gonna have much of an idea on what a tank or a carry even is, much less a preference for one or the other. Across all roles globally, Flash is taken on D between 52 and 55% of the time. The better question would be what the win rates are. Maybe just because players have already made up their mind on their summoner spell placement, their win rate could still be affected by it later once they settle into their role, right? Well, not really, actually. It turns out win rates across all roles were essentially even. Whether they bound Flash to F or D, in EU North, the win rate was exactly 50% for each. And in EU West, it was 49.99% for F and 50.01% for D. The rest aren't quite that even, but close enough that there's no real takeaway. But of course, the only thing League players ever seem to care about is what's going on in pro play. And as you may have guessed, the story is pretty similar there too. In 2015 through the spring of 2022, pros have landed at a near perfectly even split between F and D. Across all games, Flash was taken on D 48.78% of the time, and on F 49.24% of the time, with just barely under 2% taking no Flash at all. They're separated by less than 0.5% across nearly 25,000 games analyzed. In all of these games, the win rate is almost equal as well, with Flash on D just barely winning out by 0.1%. Playing without Flash sits in first at 50.04% in 4,841 instances, Flash on D is in second at 50.03%, and Flash on F sits at 49.93%. But let's be honest with ourselves, all you Flash on D people, these win rates are essentially even. So let's break all that down, shall we? Unlike in high-rated solo queue, where every role seems to have a slight preference for Flash on D, in pro play, Flash is taken on F more on the top side of the map, with top at 52% and jungle at nearly 60%, while Flash is taken on D more on the bot side. Mid takes it on D 53% of the time, bot 57%, and support 52% of the time. Much like the Flash data per region, pros more or less follow suit. EU and NA sit at around 55 and 56% on D respectively, whereas Korea comes in at a whopping 70% Flash on F. The one set of data we do have access to for pros but not solo queue though, is in China. And for all you players out there who rock that F is for Flash mantra, you may want to just skip ahead a few seconds, because just like EU and NA, and almost the entire rest of the world, the LPL is also a Flash on D region. Your saving grace, however, is that because Korea is so skewed, there are still more instances of Flash being taken on F across the 4 major regions from 2015 to 2022. While it's nice to look across all players over League of Legends' modern era, let's talk about who matters most, the League GOATs. Oh yeah, I'm talking about Faker, Uzi, Rookie, Mata, and a ton of other legendary players to touch the Rift. Starting off in the top lane, we've got Marn with Flash on D, Impact D, Smeb on F, Shy on D, and Con on D. So 4 out of 5 of our top laners took Flash on D, which goes against the grain of the overall pro top laner stats. In the jungle, we have Banky, who took Flash on F, Diamond Procs F, Yankos on F, Canyon on F, and Karsa rounds it out on F. That's 5 for 5. All you junglers out there, are you paying attention? F is for Flash and F is for Faker, and the League of Legends GOAT himself takes his Flash on F. Rookie also takes Flash on F, but Perks is on D, Caps is on F, and Bjergsen is also on D. But remember that, we'll come back to Bjergsen later. In the bot lane, perhaps the second most well-loved player of all time, Uzi, binds his Flash to F. Ruler binds it to D, Reckless is D, Doublelift is also D, Deft is also D, so is that 4 for D? But who's better, Uzi or the rest combined? Honestly, it's hard to say. And of course, last but certainly not least, we've got the supports. Mata took Flash on D, Ming uses F, Mako's got D, and Mickey also uses F, and all the supports that start with M, so the last one has got to be Madlife, right? Oh, yeah, Core JJ, got it, yeah, Flash on D for him, sure. All in all, across some of League's greatest players, 13 bind flash to D and 12 bind flash to F. And I promise we didn't try to make this equal. But it turns out, even judging by the best to ever do it, it's still hard to come to any reasonable conclusion. But there's one final rabbit hole to climb into regarding pros' flash bindings: those who switch partway through their career. Out of the thousands of pros that have come and gone since 2015, 19 have switched from one key to the other. And while some of the examples had somewhat short or unremarkable careers, many are rather well respected. For instance, Abadage started his career with flash on D, but he changed it to F in between spring and summer of 2019. His win rate on the two is almost perfectly even. And then there's Cream, who has a rather interesting setup. See, his teleport takes priority over flash, so anytime Cream runs with TP, he binds it to D, but anytime he takes another summoner like Ignite or Cleanse, he binds flash to D. He's been doing this his entire career, and even though he only has 8 games without teleport in the LPL, his LDL games are much less reliant on teleport. And there are some periods where he swapped back and forth almost every single game. Unfortunately, however, deriving win rate on flash won't really work here because you're just judging his win rate on or off teleport more than anything. Power of Evil is the same, except with Ghost rather than TP. Anytime PoE takes Ghost, it's on D and Flash is on F, but in every other game he puts Flash on D. But perhaps the most interesting player is the newest NA bot lane prodigy, Danny. He has 52 games on D and 57 games on F. He doesn't do the flip-flop thing like Cream or PoE, he plays long stretches on one key or the other. Most recently, Danny switched from D to F right before the 2022 spring playoffs, going on an historic run, getting pentakill after pentakill using his new summoner configuration. But of course, he'd played with Flash on F before. In fact, Danny has now swapped 4 times, back and forth, so maybe he will become the true authority on which is better. His win rate on D is 7.4% higher, but of course some of that may have to do with the fact that he played MSI with Flash on F.
RNG beat Evil Geniuses 5 games in a row.
Overall, of pros who've switched bindings, D has a win rate of 49% and F was at 51%. It's the biggest win rate disparity we've seen so far. So maybe there's some merit there, but since so much of it seemingly rides off the back of other factors like TP or Ignite or Ghost or so on, it's impossible to tell. Okay, enough with the conspiracy theories about TL's untimely demise. It's time for a last-ditch effort to solve this puzzle. There seemingly isn't any real solid answer among the depths of data we've collected to solve this debate, but there are some other weird factors that may go into making one better than another. For instance, though it's since been taken out of the game, for a while you could stack tier with teleport, but only if it was on your D key. Now, the odds of that affecting your game are super slim, but hey, you could very easily use teleport twice while stacking, and then if you start a fight right as tier transforms, it's definitely possible you could win a fight and even the game off of a bigger power spike that you'd missed otherwise if Flash was on F. But is that statistically significant? No, not even close. But for a while, that was a fun little win for the F Flashers, and maybe that answers why Cream runs TP on D every game. Then there's always the finger check, like we mentioned earlier. Do you place your fingers on QWE with your pinky on shift or some other key? I do. Or do you put your fingers on QWE and R? It sounds like a lead at first because logically you'd want easy access to your most important spell. But then some who use QWE still like Flash on F because it's harder to misclick. And some who use QWER still like Flash on D for whatever reason. And then what about people who use completely different bindings? What percent are they? And are there enough to skew the data one way or another? And if all of the super custom keybind players were forced to bind everything to default, what would they choose for Flash? There are of course many other questions that we have yet to answer. For instance, are there specific champions with a statistically significant difference in win rate on one key or another without being skewed by one tricks? If so, are there certain metas that favor Flash on F or Flash on D? Is there any correlation of players choosing F or D based on their other finger placements? Do win rates become significantly different based on overall finger configuration? Why do some regions have such a strong preference one way or another? Why did it flip from F dominant to D dominant in the last few years? Will the trend continue or will it cycle back? What makes the players who switch?